The Somua S35 was a French cavalry tank of the Second World War, built from 1936 until 1940 to equip the armored divisions of the cavalry. It was for its time a relatively agile medium-weight tank, superior in armor and armament to its French and foreign competitors, such as the contemporary versions of the German Panzerkampfwagen III. It was constructed from well-sloped, mainly cast armor sections that, however, made it expensive to produce and time-consuming to maintain. During the German invasion of May 1940, the Somua S35 proved itself to be a tactically effective type, but this was negated by the French command's strategic mistakes in deploying the cavalry armored divisions. After the defeat of France in June 1940, limiting production to a number of about 440, captured Somua S35s were used by the Axis powers, some of them on the Eastern Front. A derived type, the Somua S40, with an improved suspension, lower hull cast and welded turret armor, had been planned to replace the original version on the production lines in July 1940. Agreements to produce this improved type for the benefit of Vichy France, Germany and Japan ultimately did not lead to any manufacture development. The design of the Somua S35 comes from the change specifications of the 26th of June 1934 for an automitrailleuse to combat issued for cavalry use. These called for a much heavier design than had been originally specified in 1931. The new type had to be immune to contemporary anti-tank gunfire. On the 17th of May, the Army had already contacted a subsidiary of Schneider ACI, the Société d'Artillerie Mécanique et d'Usinage d'Artillerie based at Saint-Ouen, to build a prototype. The company accepted this proposal on the 16th of July and construction began on the 12th of October 1934. The prototype, with the name AC3, was ready on the 14th of April 1935. It was tested from the 4th of July until the 2nd of August 1935. Then a pre-series of 4 was produced of an improved type, the AC4, to be tested until the 27th of January 1938. These first vehicles had the standard APX-1 turret fitted with the short 47mm SAR-34 gun. On the 25th of March 1936, the AC-4 was taken on as the standard medium tank of the cavalry with the official new name Automitrailleuse to Combat Model 1935S. When a first order for 50 was made, the tank was then more commonly known as Somua S35. Today the even shorter abbreviation S35 is most often used, in English sources usually with a hyphen, S35. The mass production vehicles would have the longer SAR-35 gun. Originally, a total production of 600 was planned, to provide each of the 3 cavalry armored divisions with 200 tanks. Later, budgetary restraints led to a more gradual and limited procurement. In 1936 a second order was made of 50, followed by 100 in 1937, and 2 orders of 125 each in 1938, resulting in total pre-war orders of 450 units. Description: the hull and turret were castings with a maximum thickness of 47mm and 40mm respectively, the former of 4 sections, bolted together. 2 longitudinal plates formed the bottom. The superstructure was divided in a front and back section. The turret was a variant of the APX-1 as used on the Char B1, the APX-01CE with a larger as against 1022mm turret ring, allowing the radio operator to assist the commander in loading the gun from an ammunition stock of 118 shells and 2,000 1,250 machine gun rounds. Still, as with the B-1, the commander was expected to direct the tank while also aiming, loading and firing the 47mm SAR-35 main gun, although at least the radio duty could be left to another crew member. Radios were planned to be part of the standard equipment of S-35s. In practice, the platoon commander had an AR-29 set for communications with a higher command level, but a shortage of the short-range AR-28 sets for communication within the platoon meant that the other 4 tanks were never fitted with any form of radio. Although in some units all tanks had antennas, the program to fit the sets themselves was postponed until the summer of 1940 and thus overtaken by events. The suspension was designed by Eugene Brilliat, the same man who had developed the first French tank, the Schneider CA-1. He had worked with the Czech Skoda company and based his design on that of the LT-35, 8-road wheels paired on 4 bogies, with leaf springs and an equally large tension wheel. The first 50 vehicles had tracks consisting of 144 track links, each link with a length of 75 mm. Later vehicles had 103 links of 105 mm length. The engine was in the rear of the hull side by side with 2 self-sealing fuel tanks of 100 and 410 liters respectively, separated from the fighting compartment by a firewall bulkhead. The 200-horsepower engine, designed by Javier Sabin, drew fuel from the smaller tank, which was itself automatically replenished from the larger one. Inexperienced crews sometimes made the mistake of only filling the smaller tank. Engine and suspension maintenance was difficult and time-consuming due to a poor accessibility, though this was improved in later vehicles. The S-35 had an automatic fire extinguishing system using several tanks placed at critical spots, containing methyl bromide. Tactical function. Like the British and the Soviets, the French believed in a strict division of labor between cavalry tanks and infantry tanks. By law, tanks were even limited to the infantry, and the cavalry had to name its tanks automitrailleuses. The French army preferred to fight a defensive battle, and was convinced it would be victorious in such an engagement, but was realistic enough to understand that the strategic situation might well force it to wage offensive warfare. In fact, during the Second World War for 1941, large offensives against Germany were foreseen. Each of the 2 phases of an offensive, the breakthrough by the infantry and the exploitation of it by the cavalry, called for its own specialized vehicle, with the AMC designed to fight enemy armor. The Somua S35 was optimized to fulfill the latter role. It had good speed and adequate range, a gun powerful enough to easily destroy its 2 probable opponents, the Soviet BT-7 and the German Panzerkampfwagen III, and armor thick enough to be practically immune to the fire of both at normal battle ranges. The armor of any German tank in May 1940 could be penetrated by the S-35's 47 mm gun up to a range of 1,000 meters, so it could carry out deep strategic penetrations and destroy enemy armor reserves, trying to prevent them possessing a good anti-tank capacity. This is why today the S-35 is sometimes described as the best medium tank of the 30s. The French cavalry, however, judged the main tank to be imperfect in many respects. The one-man turret, though it is today typically mentioned as its single most important drawback, was not seen as a major flaw. A commander was supposed to acquire such a degree of dexterity that his workload did not negate the lack of need to coordinate the actions of 3 men in a larger turret crew had the advantage of a quicker reaction because of a superior rotation speed. At first, a 2-man turret was required, but when it transpired that this would reduce the armor protection, it was abandoned in favor of thicker steel casts. The CE turret varied variant mitigated the workload of the commander as it constituted a 1.5-man turret. The cavalry, however, did acknowledge three flaws, respectively on the tactical, the operational, and the strategic level. The main tactical flaw was the hatchless cupola, forcing the commander to fight buttoned up. This had been caused by the need to adopt the APX-1 turret purely for budgetary reasons. The B-1 BIS's APX-4 turret faced similar criticism from the infantry. The operational flaw was its poor mechanical reliability. The suspension units were too weak and too complicated, demanding enormous maintenance efforts, especially since the cast armor modules did not allow an easy access to the suspension and engine. Repairing broken tracks in the field was well nigh impossible. This had been caused by the fact that there was no central institution regulating French tank development. The army branches issued very vague specifications, leaving it to private enterprise to come up with precise proposals. The French machine tool national stock was relatively outdated, and tank designs reflected the limited existing production facilities. To introduce a Christie suspension, the obvious solution, demanded a thorough industrial modernization and the raising of quality standards. It was not envisaged until September 1938, when cooperation started with the United Kingdom in order to adopt the Creuse tank suspension for French tank design, and then was limited to the development of a totally new cavalry tank, the AMX-40, without planning to introduce this feature into the S35, S40 production run. The strategic flaw was the high unit price of the tank, 982,000 French francs, and the limited number of large cast sections that could be produced. The tank had to be supplemented by a cheaper type, and the only one available had been the Hotchkiss H35, much inferior in armor, armament and speed, even after it had been improved to the H39 variant. The cavalry had a very low opinion of the fighting value of this light tank. It decided to keep a large number of S-35s in the core of their armored divisions and rejected the easy method of raising more of them by dividing the S-35s among the cavalry light divisions, in contrast to the Germans, who distributed the also low number of PZKPFWIIs partly to the lighter cavalry division, and a key decision changing the mechanized light divisions into true armored divisions. It also decided against the continued mass production of even lighter vehicles like the AMRA 35 and the MC 35. This again implied that the Germans would, in May 1940, have a large superiority in strategically mobile large armored units, if 10-3, because the four French armored divisions of the infantry did not possess sufficient organic artillery and infantry to operate effectively in an independent role. France intended to raise many more armored divisions for use in a decisive offensive in 1941. As the French production capacity for cast armor sections was insufficient, at the time of the defeat negotiations were ongoing to employ American producers, and during the crisis caused by the German attacks in June it was even proposed to let U.S. firms build 2,000 vehicles. Production and operational history. 4 tanks of the AC-4 pre-series of the S-35 entered service in January 1936 with the 4 cuirassiers. On 15 April 1937, the first 2 hulls of the main series left the factory. These, produced at a planned rate of 12 per month, still had to be joined with the turrets. At the end of 1937, the SAR-35 gun became available and deliveries of finished tanks of the main production series could begin. On 15 January 1938, 4 of these were operational. By July 1938, 128 hulls had been delivered, but only 96 tanks were completed with turrets. In the spring of 1939, the number of operational tanks had increased to 192, the 2 armored division of the cavalry having attained the nominal strength. On the 1st of September 1939, the start of the war, 270 had been produced and 246 delivered. On this date 191 served with the troops, 51 were in depot and 4 had been sent back to the factory for overhaul. After the outbreak of war on the 21st of September, a 6th order of 50 was made, followed by a final order of 324, bringing the ordered total to 824. Later it was decided that from the 451st vehicle onwards the tanks would be of the improved S40 type. Production in fact totaled around 440 by June 1940, including the prototype and the pre-series. Of these, about 288 were in frontline service at the beginning of the Battle of France, with the 3 armored divisions of the cavalry, the divisions Légers Mécaniques and mechanized light divisions. Each of these had an organic strength of 8 squadrons with 10 S-35s. Each squadron, however, had a material reserve of 2 tanks, and regimental and brigade commanders in practice had personal tanks too, resulting in a total of 88 vehicles per division. Furthermore, 31 were present in the general material reserve, 49 in factory stocks, and 26 were being processed for acceptance. These vehicles were later issued to several ad hoc units, such as the 4th DCR, which received 39, part of 3E Cuirassiers, the 4th DLM, and some Corps Francs Motrices. Also the destroyed 1st, 2nd and 3rd DLM were reconstituted with a small number of tanks. The first 2 divisions received 10 S-35s. The third 20 S-35s further served with the 7E Cuirassiers, and a platoon of 3 was present in the 3E Ram of the 3E DLC. In May 1940, during the Battle of France, the DLMs were tasked with the difficult maneuver of carrying out a quick advance into the Low Countries, followed by a holding action to allow the infantry divisions following behind to dig themselves in. The 2nd and 3rd DLM were concentrated in the Gembloux Gap between Louvain and Namur, where there were no natural obstacles to impede a German advance. They had to spread out somewhat to hold that sector against incursions by the German 3rd and 4th Panzer Divisions. This was necessitated by the local tactical situation and did not reflect some fundamental difference in doctrine between the use of the DLMs and the Panzer Division. Both types of units were very similar in equipment, training and organization. The German armored divisions too were primarily intended for strategic exploitation, while the breakthrough phase was preferably left to the infantry. The resulting tank battle from 13 to the 15th of May, the Battle of Hanot, was, with about 1,700 AFVs participating, the largest until the day and is still one of the largest of all time. The S-35s gave a good account of themselves, proving to be indeed superior to the German tanks in direct combat, but they were rather hesitantly deployed as the French High Command mistakenly supposed the gap was the German Schwerpunkt and tried to preserve the best tanks to block subsequent attacks by the rest of the Panzerwaffe. When it transpired the attack was really a feint and the forces in the north were in danger of being cut off by the German advance south of Namur. The first DLM that had very quickly moved 200 kilometers to the north to help the Dutch was hurriedly rushed south again. The resulting disorder and breakdown of most of its S-35s rendered this unit the most powerful of all Allied divisions. Impotent, it was defeated by the German 5th Panzer Division on the 17th of May. The other DLMs, 40 fought a delaying battle, participated in the Battle of Arras and then disintegrated, committing its only strategically mobile armor reserve early in the battle had made the French army fatally vulnerable to a German strategic surprise. After the June 1940 armistice, 23 S-35s were allowed to be sent to West Africa to bolster the hold of the Vichy regime on that region. They were issued to the 12e Regiment de Chasseurs d'Afrique that, after French forces in Africa had sided with the Allies, operated them against German and Italian forces during the Tunisia campaign. After taking part in the Tunis Victory Parade, 12 RCA's S-35s were replaced by M4 Shermans, but crews often affixed the SOMUA plate on the new tanks. After the liberation of France in 1944, an armoured unit was raised, the 13e Regiment de Dragons, using French material, among which were 17 S-35s. Foreign service. After the fall of France, a number of S-35s were taken into service with the Wehrmacht as the Panzerkampfwagen III.It S739. The Germans modified the cupola by cutting its stop off and installing a simple hatch. On the 10th of December 1940, the first German tank unit equipped with French Butte Panzer was formed. 201. Panzer Regiment with 118 tanks. 36 of these were S-35s, the rest 38Hs. On the 10th of February 1941, 202. Panzer Regiment was established. Both regiments were united into Panzer Brigade 100. On the 27th of January, the independent 301. Panzerabteilung was formed with French vehicles. Total S-35 organic strength in the Wehrmacht was thus 90. On the 22nd of March, this independent battalion replaced the 2nd Battalion of 201. Panzer Regiment, which battalion was renamed Panzerabteilung 211 and sent to Finland in June. The only major German unit with S-35s that would fight on the Eastern Front, some were deployed by 22. Panzer Division near Sevastopol in 1942. The 21st and 25. Panzer Division in 1943 used some S-35s when reforming after having been largely destroyed. Some vehicles had their superstructure removed and were used for driver training, while others were used for security duties. Some of these units fought in Normandy in 1944, such as 100. Panzer Ersatz und Ausbildungsabteilung and 206. Panzerabteilung, while others were used in Yugoslavia for anti-partisan duties. There were still 12 S-35s listed as in German service on the 30th of December 1944. Some of the captured S-35s were delivered to German allies, 32 to Italy in 1941, 2 to Hungary in 1942 and 6 to Bulgaria in 1943. They were used by the Italians for training purposes and to equip a reserve unit. The Bulgarian vehicles were after the war used by police units. A vehicle captured by the partisans of Tito was refitted by them with a British 6-pounder gun. Projects for the S-35 SOMUA developed in 1937 the SAU-40 self-propelled 75mm gun. Its drivetrain featured an extra wheel to improve off-road capabilities, and the hull was wider. Only one prototype was built in this configuration. It fought in June, probably together with a small number of mass-production vehicles, fitted with the powerful 47mm SAU-37 gun. 72 units had been ordered on the 1st of May 1940, in order to address some of the shortcomings of the S-35. SOMUA presented the improved AC-5 type in 1939. based on the SAU-40 chassis and its Charge E1 project but with the original width. This Somua S40 had a welded ARL2C turret and redesigned cast superstructure, both to lower production costs and to improve protection standards, as the cast sections, delivered by 18 subcontractors, sometimes were of inferior quality. The new suspension strongly improved the climbing capacity, of which the cavalry had officially complained in November 1938. Its greater weight was compensated by lowering the hull height by 14 centimeters, causing a weight gain of 400 kilograms. In contrast, the engine deck was raised to fit an improved 230 horsepower engine, increasing maximum speed to 45 kilometers per hour. Although the new engine was not yet available in the summer of 1940, the armament and general nominal armor base would remain the same, but first steps to improve these, which might have naturally have evolved into a S41, had already been taken in the spring of 1940, when plans were made for a 60mm welded ARL turret. A first order was on the 21st of September 1939 made for 50 vehicles, and it was intended to become the main production type, superseding the S35 from the 451st vehicle, with total orders having reached 400 hulls. But none were completed at the time of the German invasion. The first vehicles were planned to be produced in July. Hull sections had already been cast since November 1939. Of the first 160 vehicles, 80 had been planned to be made of an intermediate type, with the old turret. After the armistice, plans were developed to resume production, partly for the benefit of the Axis powers. On the 28th of May 1941, the German ambassador in France, Otto Abetz, concluded an agreement with the French government, the Protocols of Paris. These included the intention to produce 800 Somua S40s, 200 for France itself and 600 for Germany and Italy. However, Hitler, suspicious of a French rearmament, declined ratifying the agreement. In November 1940, the Japanese government requested Germany to allow production for Japan. When Japan became a belligerent on the 9th of February 1942, it was decided that France would produce 250 Somua S40s for the Japanese Imperial Army, the first to be delivered in 12 months' time, production having to reach a peak of 8 vehicles per month in 18 months. The events of November 1942 precluded both production and delivery. Early 1942, France was finally given permission to re-equip its forces with Somua S40s, now that the type had become obsolete and the Germans had lost interest. Two versions were considered on the 24th of April 1942, both fitted with the larger FCM turret, originally developed for the Charge E1. The first would have been armed with the SAU-35 gun, operated by a two-man turret crew. The second with the longer SAU-37 gun, placed in a three-man turret. France foresaw a production of 135 vehicles, to equip 3 squadrons of 45 each. But the preparations were halted in November 1942 when the whole of France was occupied. However, a clandestine development continued, of a SARL-42, fitted with the ARL-3 turret and a 75mm L-32 or L-44 gun using an optical rangefinder. To limit weight, its side armor was to be diminished to 30mm. In 1945 it was proposed to build a tank destroyer by refitting existing S-35 chassis with a superstructure for the British 76.2mm 17-pounder gun.